Good to go, Ken. All right. Well, thanks. Good morning, guys. Thanks for being here. Hopefully this will be a quick meeting. As a follow-up to our meeting on Monday, we were kind of grappling at the end of the meeting with the idea of how to address some of the language in the contract as a bridge, because there was certain language that we wanted to be in effect basically as soon as we ratify, and other language that wouldn't go into effect until we actually moved to the 4896 schedule tentatively and as outlined in this contract on January 15th. And so the solution that I thought would address our concern, and actually there's no language change from the document that we were talking about on Monday. The document on Monday was a red line copy of current language that had been struck with replacement language to accomplish the move to the 4896. But I realized that that might have been incomplete because there was a portion of that contract that would be guiding current schedule. And so what I did is just removed all that strike through and kept the current language in place for our current schedule in Article 8, regular work week. So Section A, schedule, has a heading that says in place from 10/1/2021 to 1/14/2022, and that is the current language in our current contract that we just recently ratified.
Do you have another copy of that?
I do not. And then I put the new language that we discussed on Monday, indicating that it would be in place beginning on 1/15/2022, and then that is the language that describes the tour consisting of 2 consecutive 24-hour shifts, followed by 4 consecutive 24-hour days off, consisting of 192 hours actually worked in every 24-day FLSA period. So I felt like that contained some language to address the issue that we were grappling with at the end of the meeting on Monday. So that I would propose that language as a solution.
Ryan?
Yep.
Nothing against that in any way, shape, or form, but in looking at it, this also applies to extra duty. So that is dealing with FLSA overtime. And so Article 12 needs the same adjustment. I do have some language for that. Okay. And basically it's doing the exact same thing you just outlined. It's just adding on line 206, I believe. It just adding prior to January 15th, 2022, overtime will be paid, blah, blah, blah. And then adding after that on 210, the language that is in the red line copy that you gave us. So it just adds a little bit at the beginning, keeps the current contract language, and then after that adds the breakdown of 182 hours over the 192-hour work week.
Is that something we can throw up on a screen? Do we want to do that?
I can if Ken's got the magic adapter.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you outlining that. I had missed that on the read through when I proposed the changes to Article 8, and I think that makes total sense. Is that a surface?
It is.
So I think I understand conceptually what you're talking about, and I think we're fine with that language. So we would just outline in there, like we had struck 68 hours and 9-day FLSA period. We would just, the same as we did in Article 8, remove those strike throughs. That would be enforce 10-1 through 114, and then all of the added language to replace the strike-throughs would be in a separate class below it,
Essentially, yeah.
and it would be enforced as of 1/15/2022.
This adapter may not work.
I guess I could change it so that it's uniform to what you had said, because I just had it say prior to January 15th, 2022, rather than from October 1st, 21 to January 15th, or January 14th, 22.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think that's a good solution.
It would be nice to have the format consistent,
Yeah.
whichever way we go.
Got the gist of that. Huh? Got the gist of that?
Yeah.
If you want, I could go make those changes and print off a hard copy. If you want to take a break, or you want me to go.
Well, before we print anything up, I think there's two other things that we probably need to discuss after bringing some of the ideas to the body. There were a few concerns I think just need some clarification mostly.
Okay.
So I don't know if we want to start talking about that now or. Okay.
I
might
feel
as
like
well.
We're on the same
Might as well.
page on the language you're referencing. I don't see any need to belabor that language, so.
And if we can address the concerns of the body and get everything dialed in, then we can print a hard
Yeah,
copy and
that'd
go
be-
from there.
That'd be nice.
Okay.
So the first one was with the management rights adjustment. And the enacting policies to mitigate fatigue. I guess that one, I think there is just maybe some clarification that needs to be made for the benefit of the whole body on what that means and what level these, staffing decisions are going to be made at in particular. Does it, will it be decisions made at the AC or chief level?
Just in discussion
Or
we were
is
going,
it going to be the BC's decision, or will it be
we,
something that's made at the lowest level possible?
I gotta show
Where a
up.
captain can decide whether to split their medics or not?
Yeah, just
you know,
in that discussion,
crew.
I think we're on the same page with those.
Are we just formally saying that splitting medics, and I think that's kind of what we're getting at mostly with this, is splitting medics. But
Yeah, I think that's the intent.
Okay.
are we saying that it will be mandatory that we're doing that, or that we're formally saying that it's okay to do that? I guess is the questions and the concerns from the body.
I think that we formally say that it's mandatory to do that that would be our way to proactively mitigate fatigue. Because if we don't enact that policy or have that ability to enact a policy to that, we want to have the ability to make it mandatory. I'm not saying that that is what we will do, but we want to have the ability to put that policy in force, because otherwise it takes away our ability to react, because we've already potentially fatigued all of our workforce, and it ties our hands on the back end. And so that, that was, just to be clear, that was our intent, was to retain the right to enact policies and guide staffing decisions. This document isn't saying that we're formally telling, that this is going to be the policy, but we did want to retain that right to have that. And it's also, I think, that way it's consistent among platoons, so that we're not having one crew or one shift address fatigue differently from the others. We're looking for consistency and department-wide adoption.
Okay, and then as far as the decisions to move individuals from between apparatus or in between stations to mitigate that fatigue. Is that something that is gonna fall to the BC then, since they are, you know, running that shift for the day? Or will that be at the AC level or the chief level?
No, I think that what we would do is probably have the conversation with the BCs, make sure that our kind of staffing objectives are understood from a department-wide standpoint, and then it would be up to the BCs to enforce that objective, and then they would have the authority. So, you know, I don't intend on saying, hey, you need to move John Smith from engine 2 to engine 5. But what I intend is that the global policy would say that we want to proactively or reactively, you know, mitigate fatigue. And I think it is a safe bet that we will say not only splitting medics, but I think the goal, maybe a better way to cash that instead of saying splitting medics, is just that we don't want any one person to work the ambulance 48 hours at a time based on what we think that's going to do to fatigue. And so it's not just splitting medics and saying, well, we're going to put firefighter X on the ambulance for 48 hours while we're splitting medics. The intent is not to have any one employee work that apparatus for 24 hours, for 48 hours.
Okay.
But I'm not going to reach down and say, I want this person to move here and this person to move here. I think that's still left up to the BC, provided that they're doing that in a uniform manner across platoons. I would give them the discretion of which employee, where they go, provided that it's in line with our overall guidance.
Okay.
So what would be the process for that policy? Would it just go through the SOG committee and then become formalized in an SOG, or how do you kind of envision that?
I think
that
we
policy
would probably,
formation?
we would enact the policy to outline our staffing guidelines, and then we would give the battalion chiefs the authority to administer that policy.
Okay, I mean, I guess the majority of what we do, I mean, granted, as chiefs, you guys do have, the ability to, you have management rights. You have the ability to make policies, but the majority of our rules are housed in SOG, where we break it down, and there's the ability to have both sides have some input. So I was just wanting to know.
Would it be out of line then for us then to say the intent of this policy is to not have any employee work 48 hours on the ambulance, and then we leave it up to the battalion chiefs to enforce that? Is that not?
I mean, I think that that's I understand, and I think that's a good move. There are also some other aspects that kind of come into play, because on our typical staffing, we'll have 5 people at a station with an ambulance. And so of those people, there's typically 2 paramedics, or there's, and 1 firefighter, a driver, and a captain. And captains and drivers, I'm not saying that they can't work the ambulance, and I think that it's good for them to work the ambulance from time to time. Although they aren't paid any ambulance step pay. And also, there will be times, certainly right now, where we're short medics across the board. We won't have much choice other than to have somebody on the ambulance for 48 hours.
Sure. I understand that, and that's why I don't envision a hard and fast rule that says, you know, in no circumstance will anybody do this. I envision us to take a more, you know, just like a guideline, just saying it is the intent of this policy not to have anybody do this, but we understand that there are exceptions to the rule, and there are times when, due to someone being off either on vacation or sick leave, that the staffing is such that we may not be able to accomplish the intent of a policy. I'm not trying to tie anybody's hands or create a rigid set of rules. We want to communicate what our goals are, and in this, it would be to have a healthy and effective workforce, to minimize fatigue, you know, and then we would trust that our battalion chiefs would administer that, but we would want it to be administered evenly across platoons.
So how do you guys want it to read, to make it clear? Because it sounds like there's a concern from the body that they want it a little more specific.
I don't know that it needs to necessarily read differently. I just think it's good to have the clarification backing up, you know, what the intent is.
Okay.
Yeah, and I use the word guide staffing decisions because I'm not going to dictate staffing decisions. I would just like to guide them in a general sense to say, this is our goal, and how do we get there, you know? But for example, you know, and I will use this phrase splitting medic, but really what I mean is the goal would be to not have any one employee work 48 hours on the ambulance. That would be the ideal. I realize we're not going to, because of our current certification level, the fluctuation of the daily schedule, that may not be possible to hit that marking all the time. But I would not want a situation where a staffing officer, a battalion chief on one platoon says, well, I don't agree with this concept, and so I'm gonna put these two firefighters or this firefighter and this medic or these two medics on the ambulance every day. I'm not gonna make any effort to split them, you know. That to me would not be in the spirit or in the direction of this. We're just trying to guide staffing decisions, and we're trying to ensure an even-handed approach to fatigue, you know, and it's going to require a cultural shift on our part, and that's what we're hoping to address.
So just to be clear, because this question came up in union meeting, I mean, this with the direction you're giving, then this comes with splitting medics regardless, because we're gonna have to split that resource to be able to accomplish that goal.
Other than right now, we are still, we have unfilled paramedic appointments due to certification levels, and so it would not be possible to split medics every day on every platoon. And then when someone takes vacation or calls in sick, it would not be possible. So over time, we would have to address some of those certification issues, and we would just have to realize that even though the intent is to not have any employee work 48 hours on the ambulance, that the practice would be that for the current time, that would happen on occasion. And maybe we would try to implement, you know, the guidance would be that if we're short a paramedic at Station 3 for an extended period of time due to somebody's certification level, you know, we haven't filled that appointment, that maybe that person and that firefighter and that medic aren't always on the ambulance 48 hours at a time for 6 months. Maybe we would say, hey, let's make an effort to rotate somebody in there to give this person a break at some time interval. You know, and I wouldn't want to spell that out necessarily here, but I would work with our battalion chiefs and say, what makes sense?
And I guess the question that came up the other day was actually asking the opposite of that, in that if we do have 2 paramedics at a station, then they will be split so that no one ends up on the ambulance for 48 hours. That would be the intent.
If I understand your question to be that when we're at full staffing with paramedics, and firefighters, because again, I'm not just talking about splitting medics. I'm talking about the intent of not having any one person be stuck on the ambulance 48 hours at a time, every tour. And so I agree with what you said. I think the intent is to split medics, but it's also to split firefighters, and it's to not have any one person work 48 hours in a row on an ambulance.
And so what I think you're asking, Andy, is if we have two medics, we don't want both medics on the ambulance at the same time.
Well, because if you do that, then one of them would have to work 48 hours in order to be ALS the whole tour, right?
Well, if we,
I guess what I'm asking, and the way that it was put in union meeting the other night, is the 4896 comes with splitting medics, period.
Well, I don't think that that's a hard and fast, because as we just discussed, right now we are not at full staffing on paramedics. For example, Station 3 B platoon today
Yeah.
only has one paramedic on it, and that has been the case for some time. And so if we were on 4896 today, that paramedic would be on the ambulance for 48 hours. And but in the case where we're short-staffed, we would make efforts to ensure that that was not a long-standing practice, that they got some break, ability to come off the ambulance from a fatigue and burnout. You know, another term that we haven't talked about in this meeting is burnout. And I actually think fatigue and burnout are probably related. We may not know how to quantify that, but you know, give them an opportunity to come off the ambulance for a few shifts, maybe a couple of tours or something, get some exposure to some fire training, run some fire calls. I just think this is going to help do some of those things that we've talked about for years during my career, about blending the systems and changing the culture of who's an EMS provider. I think this is going to be a positive thing, but I guess I'm not comfortable with the statement of splitting medics. Yes, we do want to split medics, but we want to split firefighters too, and we realize that we won't always be able to split medics.
And I think the concept of blending the systems is an important one, because let's say we're at full staff. We have two medics, we have 4 people on the fire truck. If we have an ALS call, that medic is not by himself as a single medic. In most situations, the other paramedic is going to be on the engine, and if it's a call where they need multiple paramedics, then, you know, it's not like that person is going to be all by themselves. They still will have some ALS engine capabilities as well in the perfect world, right? So
And
I think the idea is that we are taking one paramedic and correct me if I'm wrong, but the concept is to, instead of try to staff the ambulance with 2 paramedics at all times, we put one of those medics on the engine, one of those medics on the ambulance, and it affects 2 things. It addresses the fatigue, but then it also allows us to have 2 units with ALS capabilities instead of just 1.
I get the concept. I was just bluntly asking if the intent would be, because this is what was brought up, that there not be 2 medics on the ambulance, because we have tried to put 1 medic on the engine and 1 medic on the ambulance.
Okay.
Because that was the concern that was brought up, and I'm trying to get.
And I guess I'm trying to understand the question is, are you asking if at some point there's going to be a time when we would, even after going to the 4896, still staff an ambulance with 2 medics?
No, what I'm asking is just simply if moving to the 4896 means that our typical day-to-day will mean that we will have 1 medic per ambulance, regardless of staffing.
I think so. I think we would
Okay.
like the ability to enact that practice.
Okay.
And forgive me, because I wasn't at the union meeting. Was that a problem? Was that a,
That was just a concern that was brought up.
okay. And so was there concerns expressed that that was a deal breaker, that was a huge issue?
No, I
Or was
don't,
that
I
just
don't know that, I don't know that there was.
Okay.
I think that was a question that was brought up and,
I think it was, I think the purpose of asking the question here is just to make sure that when we bring an amended contract back to the body to vote, they know what comes with it.
Understood.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I
And-
appreciate the question. I think it's a fair question, but
And that's why I elicit the discussion is I don't want to, I don't want us to go back to the union body with a presentation or with a proposal that we know isn't gonna fly.
yeah.
And so if there's an issue, we should address that now.
I don't believe it's a deal breaker. I mean, there may be some people that have difficulty with it, but I don't think it's a deal breaker. I just think that we need to have that clarification so that when we go
Perfect.
back, we can accurately represent
Okay,
what
perfect.
the intent is.
Okay. Sorry, I apologize because I'm kind of looking more for clarification than
Yeah.
anything else.
This is a real small thing, but just reading this here, would it improve the understanding of this, number 3 on management rights to have it say, enact policies and guide staffing decisions to allow employees to be moved between different apparatus and stations instead of just saying that they will be moved? Because that seems like kind of what you're getting at there, is that we're going to develop a kind of a global policy with the intent of these things happening, and then giving the power to the BCs to.
But what if a BC decides that they don't agree with, I'll use the phrase that was used earlier, splitting medics. And then we have one platoon where the crew or the BC says, no, I don't want to split medics. And then we lose that ability as an organization to say, no, we want to mitigate fatigue, to provide for a healthy workforce and reduce as a risk management tool as well. We lose that ability if we say that it would allow this to happen at the, for example, at the discretion of the employee or the BC. I believe that we want to be able to guide objectives and put out objectives and then give them guidelines and then give them the room to operate within those guidelines. But I think it, and the policy, the decision and policy hasn't been written, but I am willing to say that our intention is to not have employees work 48 hours on the ambulance. And I don't want to rehash everything I already said, but I think that I wouldn't want to weaken that and then put that on the BC or the employee to say it would allow you to move should you choose. I think that we should have the ability as a city to enact those staffing objectives.
Can I throw something out there? I think that this whole 4896 is a pretty substantial change for everyone. The city as well as the union. And change is scary. It's hard, especially in this context of contracts and the way we make changes. It's pretty difficult. And when we started presenting this schedule change, there was a lot of concern, fear, that a schedule change of this size may turn sour for the city or the department. And so there's been a great deal of making sure that it's going to be okay. Making sure that it's not going to turn sour on the city's behalf, and that's fair. We completely understand that. And I think reciprocally, this split medics idea gives us a little bit of fear and a little bit of, we just want to make sure that it's going to go okay, because it is a change. It's a change from what we do every day. And so if we seem a little bit scared or a little bit resistant, I think it's just normal. We don't want it to go sour on our end, if that makes sense. And so I think we're willing to work with you on this, but we just want to have kind of like similar safety guards, I guess you could say, in place on our end, that a swing firefighter isn't going to be on the ambulance for 48 hours straight. That the firefighters aren't augmenting the paramedics' well-being if that makes sense. You know, I guess all we're asking for is if it doesn't work the way that we see it now, a year from now, that we have the ability to kind of tweak it and change it and make it work. Does that make sense?
It does, and, you know, I feel like I addressed one of your points there about the firefighter augmenting the paramedic. That's why I don't necessarily like the term splitting medics. Again, you know, the intent is not to have any one employee work the ambulance for 48 hours at a time. But I also think, you know, we put the clause in there that says impacts related to the schedule. And if we discover that this isn't working as we envisioned, then we definitely are going to come together and work towards a resolution. But
Well, and one thing that I think is that right now, where this is something new to us and we haven't done this before, I think there's a lot of concerns that some things that really in the end may not be big deals, but there's a lot of concerns that those things are going to be big deals going into it because it's a new change, and it's going a different way. You know, I mean, I think there's a lot of potential that we get into the schedule and we go, oh, we were really worried about this, but it's not that big a deal. Or conversely, that we get into it and we go, we didn't think this was going to be a problem, but it is. And so I think we just need to be able to be flexible and fluid and work together on it.
I agree.
So should we keep it the way it is? Keep this line 38 the way it is? You think that'll work? With the understanding that we can come together and that we understand the intent now?
Yes, and I guess just to rephrase, so the intent is to allow staff to create global policies that will be passed down to all 3 platoons with the main intent of just preventing any one employee from working 40 hours straight on an ambulance.
Correct.
And that's kind of captures what we're saying here. Okay. So I guess the question then is, does this describe what I just said clearly, or does it need to be written in a different way? I understand it right now. I guess my question would just be, if we could come back in 3 years and look at it, does it reflect what we're talking about right here? And if so, then I think we're okay with it.
You know, one thing that I would say, and I don't have a problem with it staying there, is just that this is something that is more or less encapsulated in number 2 above it. I mean, you have a management right to direct the workforce. So, I mean, if you guys feel the need to have this in there, then I'm not saying that I have an issue with that, but I feel like every bit of this is part of direct the workforce.
I understand that point, and I appreciate that point, and I actually agree with that point. However, when we attempted to split medics a year ago during the pandemic, it was communicated through the ops meeting and through the conference calls, and it was unevenly applied on different platoons because different crews and different supervisors disagreed with the move. And so when we tried to exercise what we thought was our management right, it did not get implemented as directed. And we were told that if we didn't stop the practice, that there was going to be a grievance. And so I agree that I believe that it is within the management right to direct the workforce and do the things under number 2 that we're describing in number 3. I think we're just trying to be completely transparent and open and further delineate that it's our intent to staff the way that we've just described, because we feel like it's in the best interest of our employees and our service. And so I'm just trying to be completely upfront and clarify so there's no misunderstanding that we intend to do some of those things that we have maybe had a difference of opinion in the past, whether we should or could do that. So that's kind of the thought with number 3.
Well, I guess just my opinion out of the 4 of us here. I think with that clarification behind this language here, I'm okay with that idea. And if we're comfortable with this language carrying forward 3, 5, 10 years with that intent behind it, then I think it's all right.
Okay.
I concur.
Okay. I guess that's what I'm looking for. Or do we need to have a caucus and go talk about it?
Anything else?
No, I mean, I think, so I understand that I've presented the language in Article 8 that I think guides us to a transition. It sounds like you guys have identified the same gap in Article 12, and I agree. And then it sounds like we're both okay with the language in Article 3, and Article 12 would be the extra duty. And I would propose the language you described that contains the same formatting and accomplishes the same goal as the language in Article 8, creating 2 sets of guiding paragraphs for 2 different time periods. And I hope I've articulated, our intent with Article 3. And again, I mean, we want to, we talk a lot about changing our system, doing different things, and I think, 4896 is something different for us that I think is going to be a benefit to our employees. I'm hoping that this staffing concept is the same. And if one or the other prove not to be, then I hope that we can work together to address any shortfalls that we had hoped, because ultimately we want an effective, healthy, happy workforce delivering excellent services to our citizens.
And I think, like Eric said, I think,
Yeah.
that can be a little scary, the unknown of
Understood.
what that means. And
Understood, and I agree.
to have the clarification, just so that when people vote on it, they know exactly what they're getting.
Sure.
Is what we're looking for there.
That's fair.
There was one other concern brought up at union meeting. This would be under health and safety, that's section I. And the primary issue with this was just that, we, not just the union, but the city and the union are agreeing to implement all of the policies that Pulsar Informatics recommends without knowing what those policies are. And essentially, I think we'd like to have this written maybe a little bit more to where we will, I don't know if consider is the right word, but take all of their recommendations into account and make sure that they work for us before we blindly implement them, from the union or the city's perspective. Because I think as it's written here, it's essentially saying we'll do whatever they say.
Well, Andy, do you have the email that I handed out to you guys on Monday? Eric, could I see that? Because I think that this email kind of addresses maybe that concern. I apologize, I didn't think to, I gave out all my copies on Monday. Scott, I don't know if you've had a chance to see
I
it.
didn't actually see that yet. I've heard what's in it, but.
Here, Scott, you can have mine.
Thanks, Andy. So, I understand that concern, and I tried to reach out to Matthew, the Chief Technology Officer for Pulsar Informatics, to kind of articulate your concern. And the email I sent him is on the second page. And the first page that you're looking at is his response. I'll give you a second to read through that.
You don't have one, do you?
I'm happy to go make a copy, Shane, if you want, or I can forward you the email.
Yeah, yeah, just do that and I'll access it.
Actually, just go ahead and CC me on that.
Okay. Autumn, do you have access to that email real quick? I wonder if you can access it better on your... Oh, wait, here, I think I got it. I've got it right here. So I'm gonna forward this email to you guys. Eric, would you like it as well?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's see.
So reading this all makes sense to me, and I think is what we're looking for. Is there a way to capture that idea that, you know, like they say here, that the human element and the supervisor sign off won't be removed from the decision-making process? Is there a way to capture that idea in this language in the contract, just to make sure that we're clear on that? 'Cause I think if we can do that, then I don't know that there's an issue with this. Just to make sure that, again, everybody knows what they're voting for.
Do you have an idea for what that might be, Scott?
I don't know. I mean, it could be as simple as just another line that says, you know, right before, I guess, line 987, right before we say that we agree that they will be non-punitive, you could say, the city union agree that all adopted policies will involve I don't know, supervisor decision or sign off, or I don't know, something just making it clear that it's not that the BC or the AC or whoever, whatever level it's at, has the ability to make a final decision. That sounds like exactly what they're saying here. Just to make sure that we capture it in our contract, if that's the intent too. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think one of the concerns that was brought up was that we don't know what it is, whereas this is pretty rigid with the language that's here. It says the city and the union agree to adopt all components. You know, and that's not quite a shall, but it's pretty close to.
But the components are the three, or the four different aspects that we outlined in the webinar. That's the psychomotor vigilance testing is one of the components, and maybe we should spell those out. Well, fatigue meter is the other component. So when we say all components, I don't mean everything they tell us to do we're going to adopt. The components are those 4 things that they deliver, that we're the PVT, the fatigue meter that allows us the predictive measures to view fatigue, and those are the only 2 that the organization has access to, and the fatigue meter is related to the PVT score and their biomathematical model of fatigue. The third component the organization doesn't have access to, and the training is included in that too, and I think it's part of the countermeasure. But you would get training on fatigue, which he mentions in here. He talks about briefed on fatigue, but that's the countermeasure, is the third component that gives you guys the ability to link it to a wearable device and to understand your own work rest cycles and fatigue that we don't have access to. And he addressed that in the webinar. And then the fourth component really is what you get when you bundle all these 3 together. That's when they come in and they provide recommendations on fatigue risk management. That's their policy document. But as he said in here, it's not a rigid set of rules. And in his webinar, they talked about how they've worked with labor groups in Australia and Canada and the United States. And they've had great success because ultimately you guys want what we want. And that's a healthy, happy workforce. And they're not going to weigh into anything not related to fatigue. That's their expertise. So we're not going to be.
What if we just added a 4? If we said the city and union agree to adopt all 4 components of the PulseServe, and then if people have questions as to what those 4 things are, it's pretty simple to go in and say, the 4 things are these 4 general, very non-specific categories of this system.
Yeah, I don't know that the components portion is really that big a deal. I mean, I understand what that means. I think the question was more in the second sentence of city union agreed to implement as recommended, skipped a few words there, policies to guide decision making to manage fatigue. So the part where we say we agreed to implement policies that they recommend without knowing exactly what the policies are, that was the concern from the body. And I think that the concern that, if I understood it right, was that we'd be agreeing to let some outside company tell us how to operate our department, how we should do things, how our SOG should look, without any knowledge of what those are ahead of time. That was the fear.
So
and largely, this idea that it might be a rigid set of rules. Now this email, I think clears up a lot of that. It's not a rigid rule set, and the sentence here where he says, in fact, in our guidance material, we always include the provision that a work shift may continue with a fatigue level of 12 or more, which 12 is the cutoff for high fatigue, right?
yeah, 12 is like that threshold where they continue that.
Yeah, and so that work shift may continue, but only on the condition that senior manager provides sign-off. So that may be a BC. I think those ideas are what people want to know is going to be in the policies.
So what if we said, we've already said in our previous discussion on Article 3 that we have the right to enact policies to guide decision-making, kind of in that global sense. And so what if we said something like the city and union agree to use the recommendations by Pulsar Informatics to develop policies that guide staffing, decision-making models to mitigate fatigue or something,
I think that might do it, because then that kind of gives us with both parties, the ability to look at it and say, we like 99% of this, but that recommendation they have is just not going to work for us.
again, though, I think that would, you know, I don't think they're gonna, I think that there might be a fear that they're gonna come in and tell us how to run our department, and I don't think that they're gonna do that at all. In fact, I don't think that I think that we probably, if we sat and brainstormed, we could probably think of what their policies are gonna say. You know, they're gonna tell us what to do. They're gonna give us some mitigation strategies for when somebody scores as he says in here, a 7 or a 12. But it's gonna be up to us to decide what that looks like for our agency, because, for example, they don't know which of our apparatus are high volume apparatus versus maybe medium volume apparatus, and what the opportunities might be to move, and maybe it's not even off of an ambulance, maybe it's an engine that was on a fire all night or something, you know, to say, hey, let's take this engine and move them here, and let's take this engine and move them here. They're not gonna come in and say, well, this is what you need to do, this is how you move the pieces around the chessboard. You know, they're gonna say, well, if you had an engine on a fire all night, and when they take their morning psychomotor vigilance testing, and across the board, all 3 of them test at a 13, then we recommend that you take some mitigation strategy to prevent them, to get them rest, to prevent them from continuing to operate. And then it's gonna be up to us to say, okay, what does that look like for us? Do we move them to a lower call volume station? Do we potentially put them second due? Do we potentially backfill them? You know, I think it's going to be up to us to decide what that looks like. But I think the fear that they're going to come in and hand us a bunch of rigid rules to tell us how to run our department that's not our impression of what we're hoping to get from them. We don't want to give up the ability to enact good policies, but we also are kind of saying, look, we're contracting with you as the experts in fatigue risk management to provide us with some recommendations, and we intend to try to follow those.
Yeah, I agree that there's no indication that any of their recommendations are going to be, you know, an issue. But there is that small chance, I think, that, again, some big changes, you know, people look at and they can see the possibility, even if it's small, that it could end up being a problem. They just want to make sure it's addressed.
I guess one thing that I see, I mean, because I've read the email and I agree, and I like the email, and I like that, and that represents flexibility, and that represents, you know, that tells us that their intent is not to come in and be rigid. However, the application within the contract is rigid, and so I wonder, and so I wonder if maybe this is something where it's better to reference it in an SOG and then build that SOG based on what their program is. I don't know that, because that's, I completely understand, and I trust that when you're saying that they're gonna say this, and we're not gonna apply all recommendations, we're gonna take them in mind, and we're gonna do flexibility, or we're gonna use flexibility to do that. But that's not what this says.
I understand. The problem, I think, just is in some of the timing and some of the application. I had a thought that I wanted to cover is, so if I forget, bring me back to the SOG concept. I also wanted to, you know, and maybe we could put some language into here. You know, he mentioned in there that, as I referenced a minute ago, that they've worked with labor groups and they've had good success, and they talked about the shared responsibility between the organization and the employee to deal with and mitigate fatigue. And so I think that actually that's good language that points to the fact that we're all sharing in this responsibility. The thing about the SOG is that we kind of need a commitment, and we're going to use it to guide our staffing guidelines that we just kind of talked about in Article 3. And frankly, if we're okay with that language, I'm having a hard time imagining a policy that they would recommend that doesn't figure into what we're referencing in Article 3, that, you know, we're going to use their recommendations to guide policies and staffing decisions to mitigate fatigue.
Well, what if we sharpened up what it says here? Sorry to interrupt, Chief, but I just had an idea. What if we just sharpened up what we agreed to, instead of saying we're going to agree with all of the policies they recommend? Let's just say we agree to enact policies as they relate to fatigue risk. What am I trying to say? Fatigue. And so that way, if they came in and said, well, you know, this guy can't work overtime after this situation, and we want to move this truck. We don't think that's going to happen. We're with you, but if we just said that this is what we agreed to specifically, would that ease our concerns? Would that ease your concerns?
So I think I understand where you're coming from. Let me, the final thing is, you know, again, we're at the position to where, and maybe what I was going to say isn't even, I guess I don't want to sell the farm, because we currently have language in our SOG today that says that we may examine work rest cycles longer than a certain duration, and it includes OT callback, I think, and trades. And we've agreed that those could be considerations. I don't think they're going to tell us you can't work anybody past 48 hours or 60 hours or 72 hours. But they may say, well, you know, they're, I think, going to point to the PVT and say, look, if this person scores this level, then we recommend that they not continue to work. And so I have a hard time thinking where they would tell us to do something that's not related to fatigue. And in this case, the example, you know, maybe this person can't work another shift of overtime after they've just worked maybe they're 48 and a shift of overtime or a half shift. Then at some point we got to say, well, how long are we going to let this person work? You know, when are we going to implement a strategy to mitigate fatigue? And so I would hate to tie our hands and say, well, you can mitigate fatigue unless it means, you know, for example, you just mentioned not letting this employee work more overtime. You know, well, at some point, what's our duty to ensure that that fatigued employee gets rest? So
I think, I think we've all been saying that, yeah, we can't imagine that they'd have any policies that would really be outside of what we expect them to be. But I guess what we're looking for here is, how do we say we're 99.9% certain that that's what's going to happen. Everything's going to be as we expect, nothing way out of bounds. But since this is a third party that we're bringing into this contract, and saying that we agree to do anything they tell us, how do we manage that 0.1% chance that something comes through that we're just like, no, that doesn't work? We say that if city union agree, or if both parties agree that a portion of their recommendations are inappropriate for us, we don't have to follow them, or you know what I mean. I mean, we're talking about something that's not going to happen.
we're basically
but it
looking
has a potential
for some saving language.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. It's like, I think we both want the end goal, you know, the final product. We all want to try this PVT, and we all want it to work. We're all on board with that. But it's hard to say, and again, we're kind of in this transition period of going from where we are now to starting the PVT. There's so many moving targets, there's so many moving parts, it's hard to nail it down in contract language. I think if we agree on the end product, I think that's what we should be writing this contract language, is the end result. And it's just like if you were going to buy or rent a car, and they said, yeah, we want you to rent this car, it's going to be $200 a month. just sign this contract. And you go, okay, well, where is it? Well, it's not written yet. Well, no one's gonna sign that contract that's not even written yet. We just wanna see it, you know, we wanna, before we just absolutely agree to it, we wanna at least read it and see what it says. I don't know, am I off base there? I just think that,
I understand.
I think, but then we're gonna have to just come to we're gonna have to say, yeah, we're gonna extend an olive branch and we're gonna trust you that when this is all said and done, we're gonna be where we wanna be.
And this
I
is maybe
think,
less of a, this
well-
is maybe less of us, like, us trusting you,
Yeah.
or you trusting us, but us as a collective department trusting this company.
Okay.
You know, I mean,
So let me propose one thing, let me just, I think the problem, Eric, I understand what you're saying, and there's a degree of trust on our side as well as your side to this third company, and it may sound corny, I get a pretty warm fuzzy from Matthew that they have a good product and that they really have had good success in mission-critical industries with reducing fatigue among workers. And so I feel like this is a really good move. The problem is we're asking them to produce a custom product for us. And so it's hard for us to say, look, we just want to see the product before we buy it. Because they have to put time and effort into building that product for us. And I tried to, ask him, I tried to address that in this email because I understand that concern, but we're not saying, hey, we want to buy a Mazda. We're saying, hey, we'd like you to build us a custom whatever. But we want to see it before we agree to it, and there's just, it doesn't exist at this time for us to see. And it requires a commitment from us to get to the point where we can see it. And so there does have to be some trust on your part and our part together for this third party and between each other. And so maybe we could get there by saying that City and Union agreed to, and we could even, instead of implement the FRMS, we could say use the recommendations by Pulsar Informatics to develop the policies and guidelines to manage and mitigate fatigue. And then we could put a sentence that said, if the city and union both agree that one of the recommendations by Pulsar Informatics is not beneficial,
Ineffective.
yeah, then we may not implement or choose to use that policy or piece of information. I mean, that's our intent. We're not going to turn the keys over to Pulsar Informatics to run our department from a fatigue risk management. We're looking at them as a consultant to say, hey, help us mitigate, implement some strategies to ensure we have a safe, healthy workforce.
the idea of a custom product kind of changes the perspective a little bit, I guess. We talked about it that way.
Maybe that's one
And
thing.
so-
We thought you guys understood that was a customized
You know,
product. So just
I
like the
think
rollout,
we probably
it will
did,
take
but-
6 months
Okay.
to get, you could start the PBT and the, what's the other part, where they do the fatigometer type part. But it will take them 6 months, I think was his projection, to actually produce a policy because he has to have input and understand your industry. And would it be beneficial to say that you guys would participate
Yeah, so
in
what if-
developing that?
What if it said something along the lines of, we agree to implement the custom FMRS built around jointly agreed upon priorities? And then continues on with it. So, I guess that kind of frames it more as a, the
joint
priorities
effort.
of health and safety and all that, and the priorities that we keep the human element in decision-making, and, which sounds like that's their priorities too, but we can define those as our own, say, we agree to the custom program that they're gonna develop for us built around our priorities.
Well, but they also don't have any expertise in our field. This is their first time getting their feet wet in our industry. It's not that they don't have any expertise in fatigue management, but they don't have any expertise with what we do. And so I still think that there's a concern about blankly agreeing. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I've read the email. I think that I still, and I hate to keep beating a dead horse, but I like the idea of saying that we agree to make a rule, and the rule is going to be based on this. And that's why I keep going back to maybe what we need to do is put in an SOG and say there will be an SOG that governs fatigue, and it will be built based on this. And then as we go through what is our normal process, then there's going to be, if everything is as good as it sounds like it's going to be, then every bit of it's going to be in there. And then we have the ability, but we also have the ability at that point to have the conversation in those meetings and look at those items and see it after the product's built.
So 2 thoughts on that. One, I disagree with your first statement that these guys have no expertise in firefighting or in our industry. They have expertise in fatigue, human beings working in mission critical industries, including workforces that work the same schedule that we are talking about going to. And so I just don't think that we should dismiss them as an outlier. Yes, this is the first time they're venturing into fire, and I believe that good on us for taking this step to do something outside the box, if you will. So I disagree that they're not, that they maybe don't have expertise to bear on this situation. And then the second thing is, the problem kind of comes back to this custom concept. You know, I just think if the city is going to order this custom build, we would like it to be on a timeline and a commitment that when it's done, we're going to drive it. And I think that kind of what you described leaves too much variance in the fact that when we present you with the new car that was just custom built, you say, well, I don't like the color, repaint it. I don't like the tires, or I don't want the car. I think we want some assurance that this addresses the concerns that the city has had about fatigue. And we even, and I will say, we added the last sentence that says, look, if at the end of 6 months, we don't think that this is providing us with value, if we both agree, then we'll get rid of it. You know.
Can we just say, I guess simply, we agree to implement, again, the custom FRMS, and then somewhere in here we say, during the development of that FRMS, the city and union will both have input with Pulsar Informatics.
Yeah, and that's what you described.
And just lay it out in the contract that we both
Have
parties
input.
get to have input on how it turns out, and would that solve the problem?
I think so.
Labeling it that it is custom and that
The
we all
city and
are
union will
participating.
participate in
The development.
the FRMS development as
Yeah,
requested by
perhaps something
Pulsar
like that.
Informatics.
Yeah.
Do we need to talk about it in private?
I think that'd be a good idea.
Okay.
Heather texted me and said that Paradise is open.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else before we go back there? I mean, how does that idea sound to you?
So if I'm clear, then it will say that the city and union agree to adopt, and do we want to delineate the all components to those 4 things, the PVT,
I suppose we can, just for clarification.
Yeah, I think that would help with people not as familiar with this to understand that the components are not necessarily the policies or the rules, but the parts of
The
the
pieces of the system.
pieces of the
Yeah.
program. I think that would help for,
Well, I think it's good to narrow it down and put that stuff in there, but what if after evaluating everything, they think outside the box and, hey, there's this fifth component that we think will be real beneficial to you? And that's where I think having the flexibility of moving it into an SOG and working together on that stuff comes into play.
I guess along those lines, I mean, are we envisioning that once we get the recommendations from the company that we both had input on building, that they would be adopted as a separate policy manual, or would they be like, here's all the recommendations, now let's make the SOGs to include all of that?
I believe that we intend to, I don't know what kind of product they're gonna deliver us, so, but our policy is not, or our plan, our vision is not to get what they recommend to us and then run it through the meat grinder of the SOG committee. We want to implement a product. And so then we would have, obviously it's gonna be an incomplete product because it's not going to have the details of how that affects our staffing and our movement of personnel and our assignment to apparatus. And so there's still going to be some work to do. But that's where we would guide the decisions and the algorithm.
So could we say that maybe we would take the policy as the custom policy or custom FMRS and implement it at that point as an SOG without going through, because it's already been, at that point it will have had labor input and staff input, implement it as an SOG. And then that way, it's not a separate document, so that as we go down,
Sure.
go through time, then it can be adjusted through the SOG committee, but it's implemented as received initially. And then if we run into issues 6 months down the road, we can say, well, SOG committee can fix this problem.
Understood and agreed, and I'll just use the frequency of PBT testing because that seems like something that we can quantify easily. For example, if Pulsar Informatics looks at our schedule and our workforce and they say, we recommend you take PBT when you arrive at shift on day 1, at the end of shift on day 2, and at the end of shift 1, and at the end of shift 2. So 3 times in your 48. I don't know what they're gonna say. They haven't looked at it yet. But I would not want then for the union to say, well, we don't agree with 3 times. We think it should only be 1 time, or we should be 2 times. That's in a situation where, but if they came back and said, we think you should take I won't blow it out, I was gonna say 100 times, but, even 20 times during the shift, the tour, then that's a situation where both of us would say, that's not reasonable. We have a job to do, we have calls to run on, we have training to accomplish, we have inspections to do, we have education to do, we have rig checks to do. 20 times a shift is not gonna work for us. So, we're not gonna do that. I don't think they're gonna come and do that, I really don't. But if they recommend for us that we think you should implement PVT 3 times throughout the duration of the shift, or 4, or and this would be the threshold for a point testing, if somebody is going to get a long-term assignment. For example, you mentioned
transfer or something, then maybe we have them prep for that by taking the PVT, then we would implement that policy, and I would not want it to become a back and forth of, no, we don't agree to that. Well, this is what they're recommending, and we think this would be the best way for us to mitigate fatigue and have a good risk management policy. I just don't want to get balled up in that back and forth. So absolutely, they indicated on their webinar that they would work with us and you to gather information about our workforce and our schedule and everything else. But then when they present us with their recommendations and product, we intend to use those to develop the policies that we will use to mitigate fatigue.
It seems like at some point, we have to take the leap of faith that they are in fact the experts in fatigue management. And so we have to just roll with it and say, we're gonna trust that this company knows more about fatigue management than we do and may recommend a policy that we don't necessarily like, but we have to, we have to work with them to understand the reasons why. And
I guess I am asking for some measure of faith and trust in that we're here to get you guys to a schedule that most other fire departments have moved to in the Western United States. It's something that your people want. It's something that I want for you. We just want to make sure, and frankly, to reiterate, I wish we were using PVT now under our current thing. I think this is really going to be a beneficial thing. And so but at some point we have to, I think, say, yeah, let's get there. Let's make it happen. And then, I forget where it is, if something happens, or I think it might be in 28, I don't know, maybe it's not. If there's something that we're seeing that isn't working for us or that we think we need to tweak, then we're going to work together under our normal ways. It mentions the SOG process. So, any policy or document that we adopt from them and if we put it into an SOG, then later on we could come back and say, hey, this isn't working for us. Why don't we change this?
Yeah, and I think that, even if we take what they give us initially and just say, okay, we've got the final product, the custom build, we're gonna implement it. I think that having it put in as an SOG, as received, and then we start working with that gives us the ability down the road to tweak it through our normal channels, as needed, if needed.
But I just, to be clear, the city wants us to implement this fatigue risk management program system to alleviate some of their concerns over what looks on the outset as a very difficult schedule, So I think that I believe we've come down to what I think is a really reasonable policy that really is only asking you guys to push the I believe button with us and say, hey, we think this fatigue risk management system is going to be of value to us and to our organization and to our employees. And so let's get there.
I know there's a lot of ideas floating around there, but what if, from this section, Article 28, Section I, what if we said, we agree, both parties agree to this system and the components, and if any issues arise, then we will revert back to Section B of Article 8, the impacts section that we've kind of already developed. And that way, we agree to the policy, we agree to building it, and it's going to be implemented. But if some issue comes up that's unforeseen, we'll go through the 4896 schedule impacts section instead of, and that just, because we don't know what the problem's going to be. So that's just our our backstop, I guess.
Sure.
Would that, do you think that would work?
Yeah, that seems like it addresses it. I mean, that language is already in there, but, I don't have a problem reiterating it and saying that, both parties agree to work together to address any negative impacts, or not even negative impacts, just any concerns. I mean, both parties, I believe that it's our intent to work together to make this the best product that we can for our employees and our organization.
Well, Andy, you got an electronic copy of
I do.
this? Maybe if we take a quick break, maybe we can tweak this section just a little bit with some of these ideas that we were just talking about, and then throw them up on the screen and see if we can agree to it. Paradise is,
Yeah, Paradise is open.
Would you email it to Autumn, and maybe we'll have her just run the computer and run
the tweaked version,
well,
send it to her.
either way, or you could just bring up the one that we're working off.
Well, really, the only changes that we've made today from what you gave us on Monday, or that we brought up here, were the memorializing our current contract in Article 8, and also the related changes in Article 12. So that's all. I mean, other than that, the management rights that you guys had in there is still in there. And we're just having discussion about the other. I can send you the language that we have for Article 12, but that would be the only change from where you're already at.
Okay. Yeah, if you would send that to Autumn, we'll bring that up, because it sounds like that has your language edits as well as the ones that I just presented. And then we will work on section I, which is where we're at after caucus. Okay, does that sound good?
Okay, this
Yeah.
is gonna take just a second.
Okay, so we'll take a caucus.
Okay. Are you guys gonna hang out here? Or do we need to find you?
No, I'll be back in a few minutes. I'm gonna
Okay.
use the restroom.
Yeah.
Just on this language, right? Section I, not necessarily the language you're seeing, but
Yeah, so we have a copy here that maybe Andy could,
Can you email it
Email
over to
it
me
on
and then I
and
can
then-
pull it up?
we could throw it up there.
Yeah, give me 1 second, I will. We'll save S, so it's got a different name.
So you guys were probably reading that.
I gotta move so I can see.
do you want us to, yeah, what's,
While you're going through there, we adjusted Article 12 also to just
The
match
extra-
the same
extra
format.
duty?
Yeah, same format as the work schedule, Article 8.
so could we, let's hit Article 2 there and just double check our, is that,
You want to go where? Article 2?
okay, there was that, and then Article 8 was the next, right? And that's the one that we addressed the 2 time periods. Okay,
Section
I need
B.
to go back up.
Section B impacts. I think that's the language that we had
Yeah, that hasn't been adjusted.
That was presented on Monday.
So Article 12 has just been moved around a little bit to match that same format as Article 8.
Okay. And that first paragraph is just existing language, is that correct?
Yes.
I guess one really quick thing, just because we already realize this, and this is more law than it is contract language. But certainly when we make that transition, we've talked about it and we've selected this date to lessen the impact. But a platoon will be within an FLSA cycle, and of course they will, within that same period, they'll end up getting 24 hours of overtime.
No.
No?
We've worked it out and we intend to present you with the way that we intend to move,
Okay.
but it doesn't necessarily equate to 24 hours of overtime because they get a biweekly rate and we're moving them into another FLSA period. It will affect their premium hours, but I don't think it's accurate to just say they'll get 24 hours of overtime. It's a little more nuanced than that. And we have we worked it out based on the original proposal, which was a 18-day cycle. The impact shouldn't change much with the 24, but we intend to show you how that calculation is going to be done. But it didn't seem like it was needed in the contract. We're going to follow FLSA law and the way that it moves you from one cycle to the other.
Okay, well, and, I mean, this obviously is slightly new territory for me because every time that we've moved from one FLSA cycle to the other, the change was not considered permanent unless somebody was moving from platoon to platoon. Whereas this, obviously, we're moving from one FLSA to a completely different one, so the rules are slightly different than what we've dealt with in the past.
Yeah, we think we have a good handle on it, and as soon as we commit to a date, we intend to work with you and finance so that we're all on the same page of how we're going to get there.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we can just go down to health and safety, section 9.
But I just want to be clear that that didn't contain any language saying a platoon was going to get 24 hours of
No,
overtime.
it doesn't, I just, no, that was me asking about,
There will be an FLSA liability to the city in the move.
okay, yeah.
We'll get to that down there.
I mean, that should be pretty
Passed
easy,
it,
as long as
Article
we
28.
follow the law, so,
Yeah, we're gonna follow the law.
yeah, that should be pretty easy to figure out. I mean, not easy, but at least we have the guiding.
So
One more down.
So that first line, I didn't know the names of all of the products, so we'll have to correct those, but I think those are the 4 categories that you're talking about.
yeah, so it would be including PVT Work Fit is the name of the one. And then the second one is fatigue meter, and that's the bioinformatics stuff.
Okay.
And then the personal stuff is the countermeasure.
I think it's countermeasure and training, are they kind of the same?
Yeah. And then those 3 components, then the FRMS is the recommendations and policy development that's kind of the custom program.
Okay.
And even really the fatigue meter is custom because they use your work schedule to build in a kind of a predictive fatigue management program.
Okay. So really then after that, it's just these 2 lines, essentially saying that, as Pulsar Informatics works with the department to develop this FMRS, that we want to have a representative that can be involved with that. And then, that when it, oh, that's spelled wrong. When it is developed, we would like to see it implemented in SOG form as it's delivered by Pulsar Informatics. So it won't go through SOG committee once we get the final product, but then moving forward from there, it can be adjusted as needed through our normal channels. And of course, that gives, staff and labor the same ability to veto any changes that would be coming, you know what I mean? As we currently work through SOGs.
Walk me through that last statement that you made about vetoing any changes. Because I
Well-
know we had talked about,
Maybe that's not the correct, correct terminology, but, so we get we have input on the front end in development of the FMRS. Once we get the final product, we take it and we say, okay, this becomes an SOG or maybe multiple SOGs, depending on how it needs to be, split up. And then they go into effect at that point. They wouldn't go through SOG committee to be reviewed again. But that way, we don't have another set of documents that we work with in the department. We stick to our current SOGs and RGs. And then as we move forward, a few months down the road, if something needs to be changed, now it's already in the SOG format and it can be dealt with through our normal channels. So that ensures that it gets implemented as delivered, but then also allows us to not have to have a third set of documents that we have to have new rules for changing or updating.
okay.
Ryan, real quick, just for clarification, the fatigue meter is using like your Fitbit? No, right?
Yeah, the countermeasure.
That's countermeasure?
Yeah.
Okay, and that part will be optional for employees. I mean, and you've said multiple times that the department doesn't have access to that, but certainly if someone chooses to use it, it's there. If they choose not to use it, it's not.
Correct.
But it's a component of the product that this company's gonna get.
It is a component, and
We are going to purchase it.
It will be available.
We are going to purchase it, and it will be available, but we will,
But it won't be a
whether an
mandatory
employee
thing.
uses it or not, will not be.
Part of the incentive of purchasing the whole package is that if we do that, then they help us with the customized development without charging us additional. So we buy the whole package, so you guys will have that benefit. But it actually saves us some money in the policy development and if we buy a package versus buying pieces. So financially, it's a good incentive to go that route as well.
I just wanted to mention it so that people don't feel like as if they are being put into a mandatory thing.
No.
Do you mind if I just take 2 minutes to go ensure that city legal is fine with us implementing this not as a standalone document and in our normal cache of SOGs?
Okay. Yeah. And yeah, just to be clear again, though, it's not going to be subject to the same initial adoption system.
wanted to ensure that the city didn't have a different expectation about there being a third policy document or something, and they're okay with it being housed in our SOGs, provided, as you said, that the union and the city would have input on the front end. I just want to make sure I'm interpreting this correctly. And then the custom FRMS will be directly implemented as delivered in SOG form. So we both have input on the front end, and then when they come with recommendations, we implement those recommendations, and they are in force.
Yes, and then maybe, we'll have to decide how it, or see how it comes out, but it may be one SOG or multiple. Or
Certainly.
But, yeah, that would be the intent, to have it be in force once it's delivered, given that we both had input on the front end. And I think mainly that would be just to make it cleaner going down the road, trying to adjust to things as they come up.
Sounds good to me, and it sounds like that would be in line with the language we had put into section 8, I believe, about addressing any concerns. So, you know, if we have it cached in the, because we call out the SOG policy, so I think that that language is good. I think we had really similar language. I think the language we were thinking, instead of it saying a union representative will be assigned, I just said the city and union agree to work with Pulsar Informatics as they develop the recommended FRMS. So I'm not married to either language. I think both have the same intent, that this is a collaborative effort for us to help them in developing their recommendations, and we agree to implement those as a good solution for our department and our people.
I guess to maybe clarify that too, you know, as a representative, we're hoping to be able to have an individual that will be, I guess, will be that representative that can be involved with communications that you guys have with Pulsar, and have a line of contact with them and with you about all the development of this system.
Yeah, we just thought that would be more efficient to have one point of contact.
Yeah, we didn't want it to be death by committee.
When would that ever happen in the fire
It happens all the time.
All right, I think we're good with this language. So,
Can we just
So-
save and email back
so
was that?
these
do you,
modifications? With just those few modifications, they're accepted. I can
I
resave
think
this,
we
send
can.
it back out.
I think we can, yeah.
let's, so we have the Article 2. We have the initial agreement language about when it was executed. Would you like me to go print a hard copy of this to TA?
I've got it on a jump drive right here, if that's what you'd like to do.
Sure.
On this one as well.
Yes,
What's
I'd
that?
like to
It's
TA.
saved on this one as well. Do you need it
Let's
with these
TA.
changes?
I'm gonna go print 2 hard copies, and we'll sign off, one for each of us, and then we will, each side can get started on the ratification process, is that? So, but I think it'd be good to have a hard copy. Do you want me to have Autumn email that, or do you want me to take your hard drive, or your thumb drive, Andy?
I think doing it on the thumb drive, in my experience, that's the
Okay.
easiest way to print in HR. So Let me close all these down so that I can.
All right, I'll be right back. Give me about 5 minutes, guys.
Yeah, you may take a peek just to make sure I gave you the right one.
Are there multiple versions on it? So just be one, obviously.
No, there's,
Online.
I saved all of the rest of them to the computer,
Okay.
and so there's only one on there, and I believe it's the correct one.
So I've got the agreement printed out, but I just had one question, and I don't think it requires change. I just want to make sure I understand the phrasing. So this says a union representative will be assigned to work with the city and Pulsar Informatics to develop the custom FRMS, which is the fatigue risk management system. The custom FRMS will be directly implemented as delivered in SOG form. Obviously, we've talked about the fact that some of our policies are going to need to be, and I'm assuming that we will have that input as part of this process with them, so that when it comes to us, but obviously we may have to put some different formatting in it, or a policy that says Pulsar Informatics, maybe the product they deliver doesn't say, talk about working on the ambulance for 48 hours at a time. So just as long as,
Yeah, I guess the intent there, yeah, I don't know if it needs changed either, but maybe as delivered isn't quite as clear. The content delivered will be implemented. And like we already talked about, we may have to break it up into multiple SOGs. We may have to alter some other SOGs we have in place, but the content that comes out of that FRMS.
how we achieve the recommendations that they're outlining.
Yes.
So, okay.
Well, there's nothing that says we can't form another SOG that dictates that and refers back to the one.
Okay. What's the, I haven't done this in a while. This is just usually TA and a date and both of our signatures, is that?
That's typically how it goes.
Andy, will you be signing for the union?
Well, Scott's done the bulk of the negotiation, but if it's gonna be better to have my name on there because I'm the president. I can do
President should
that.
probably sign it.
Goodbye. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate the work, and I think this is going to be a good move for everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.